Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Terry Stockton. Welcome to Educational Foundations. You'll start on this class about the 29th, but I wanted to give you this video a little early so you could have an idea of what to expect in the class and what sort of things to look for. My goal is to have you as prepared as possible before the beginning so that it goes smoothly and you can have more fun in the summer than just taking a master's class, because I know that's not probably your dream summer vacation. Educational Foundations is a study of the systems of education. So you'll be looking into how systems impact society. So think about how the political, economic, historical, sociological systems impact our schooling and our society and ultimately our children on a daily basis. What we believe in the ideologies of these particular concepts changes how our society runs. It changes the culture of our society. So that's what we explore in Educational Foundations. I personally think it's essential to understand this in order to understand who we are as a people and understand where things come from. How culture specifically addresses our schooling changes our society, but it also changes how we think and how we revere or look to people. For example, if you go back to Confucius, my historian colleagues who are looking at social foundations from a historical lens would look to Confucius and say, Confucius and Asian cultures built a lot of their schooling and their studies on mentorship, on building a relationship. It's relationship oriented in orientation, although very difficult sometimes and rigid. The idea is that the teacher, the instructor, is a mentor and a person to be revered. That revering of culture and that revering of individuals changes how they look at teachers. So teachers are thought more positively in the culture. They also have a view of, it's called shu ha ri. Shu is the idea of do it as I've done it. So when you work with students early on, you just say, try it this way, do it this way. So there's a precision to getting things in a way that the mentor wanted to do it. But then the mentors shift and their concept change to do it how your body can do it, or do it how your mind and identity can do it for you. And that takes a lot of time. And then the last part is where you return to the basics, but you explore the basics from the perspective of who you are as an individual. Here's the funny part, at least within martial arts structures, which I love, you really never become a student until later on. So you start as a novice and explorer, and then you think about, as you go through, if you're in martial arts, you'll start out as a white belt or a first kyu, and then you'll go all the way up to your 10th kyu, or go from a 10th kyu to a first kyu rather. And then when you get to a first kyu, you start what's called first dan, and that's a black belt. In martial arts culture, you don't even start becoming a student until you've reached that level. Your black belt is you are now a student, so you can start learning. It's a fascinating way of approaching learning, and I think it changes the perspective of how they think. Sparta in Greece, it was a warrior culture. Their whole first classroom was not constructed to build brilliant thoughts and philosophies and music. The first school in Sparta was built as a warrior school. It was a place so that people could learn how to fight and eventually beat the Athenian state. And that war became the premise of what they did. So listening and following orders was a significant part of that schooling. Athens had already proved themselves to be the prominent warriors in the warrior state, so they had moved past that and really was starting to look into arts and music and philosophy. And so you run into Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and the great original teachers of history who would help train sophists who would become itinerant philosophers and help the community learn and build and create art and think. And so these concepts changed because our itinerant philosophers were taken in, they were revered again. I'm not sure what happened in the States, and I'm sure some of you are thinking that too, but things have changed. And I think it's important to note that change. One of the things that did occur, and we're going to get into my sort of lens of history slash philosophy. I'm more sociological than I am historical. But we have to start with Jefferson because Jefferson really changed and built our education system. The first compulsory school system that existed was in the United States. And within the United States, Jefferson really wanted to change our schools so that our socioeconomic status didn't really determine whether or not you were going to be successful. So that work was essential to putting together that compulsory school system with Horace Mann. I know all that educational history stuff. Here's why it's important. We look at that and we think, what a wonderful idea. It's so spectacular that Jefferson did and took care of the United States that way. But he only took care of some of the United States. Jefferson was deeply flawed in his ideology. And we can build context and say context is important, and this was part of what had naturally happened in the United States at the time, so we have to be forgiving. I really don't think we need to be. I think there's times that we can look at something and just know it's wrong. Know that fundamentally it's inaccurate. And one of the inaccuracies that Jefferson subscribed to was white supremacy. He believed ultimately that black people were inferior to white people. He has writings that support that ideology. He believed that women shouldn't be educated either, that they lacked the intellectual capacity to be successful writers. So that's the beginning of our school system. It's also part of the remnants that exist in our schools today that shape how we teach and learn. The other thing that I think is important to remember about our schools, especially with Horace Mann, as he went and became the first real school superintendent, their goal was looking at a bunch of wild Americans that had no structure and very few laws and no way to create civility. There was lots of warring going on. There's lots of fighting, lots of dueling, all kinds of stuff that was violence and aggression, and we had no means of controlling the populace. So school, fundamentally structured through Christianity and religion, was shaped to control a population of wildness. So the fundamental beginnings of our schooling were to control and to segregate. Oh, that's disappointing, I know. But it is the truth, and it's where we began. And it's also the remnants of what we currently have. You can see these remnants in our schools today because you see what happens with our students when we sit down and say, from our kindergartners on, sit down, shut up, and do what I tell you. And that lesson follows through most of our students' existence. And in fact, I suggest there's a very important reason that we do that, and that is to control the population. So we don't have to look at what's going on at a bigger level. We don't have to think critically because it dissuades us from thinking critically, and that makes it different. It changes us. We're still segregated in our schools, in part because of that same ideological Jeffersonian concept of learning. I'm going to suggest that a lot of that is we look at deficits and we start looking at things like how we need to change the culture when we go to academia. Because Bordeaux brought up this concept of cultural capital, and the reason that we struggle is if we're first generations going to college is because we have lack of cultural capital. Again, deeply flawed idea. This moves more into my concepts of deficit thinking about sociological perspectives and labeling theory. We become who we are because we're told we're that thing long enough. All of these lenses are social foundations. It's huge, and it's a rabbit hole that you can go into for hours, and I don't want to get into it because this isn't even a class. This is just telling you what the class is about. So move on, Terry. Here we go. The second part of this discussion today is I wanted to share with you very briefly what the expectations of the class are, what you can expect generally over the course of the structure. First, let's talk about when we're going to meet. We'll meet 3 different times throughout this semester. We'll meet on July 11th, July 25th, and August 10th. And on those 3 different dates, we're going to meet from 10 a.m. until 12 p.m. There's a Zoom link. It'll be over Zoom, so you can meet anywhere in the world that you want to. It's going to take 2 hours of your day. Each of those days are going to be run by the class. Well, in part. I mean, I'll be there, of course. But what we're going to do is I'm going to split you all into small groups, and those small groups are going to have a discussion about either questions related to the readings that I've already posted, so you'll see them ahead of time, or the reading themselves. The 25th is going to be the readings themselves. The 11th, you're going to have guided questions. You'll have that brief discussion within small groups. You'll come to the class as a whole, and then we'll engage in a larger discussion. You'll share out, Socratic method sort of questions, or you'll post some ideas that you came up with, and then we'll ask for feedback on that. And I will help along with that as an active participant in the class, adding where I can. I like to have you all dig into that as much as possible, because that's where the real learning happens, when you all engage in the work in a deep way. The last class, what you're going to do is you're going to share out your literature review and your research that you've done over the semester, over the 6-week period. Hence, I'm also giving you a little time. If you want to get started on that early, you can go ahead and start. That's the structure of the class, the structure of our meetings. The other 3 classes periods where we're meeting asynchronously, I'm going to provide you a short, it might not be that short, I'll try, video on the content that we're covering that week that will address the readings, but in a broader way will address the topic and the content. So make sure that you're doing the reading to supplement that, so you have a whole picture of it. I can't cover everything that I want you to have within the readings. That's why they're there. Please be prepared with the readings, especially before the asynchronous class or before the synchronous classes, so that you can be ready for your group discussions. It will help things go more smoothly. You won't have to go back and read the book as you're trying to figure things out at the same time. Even if you have a brief discussion with your team, with your group ahead of time, to make it easier to do that. That's about it for the structure of the class. As far as assignments, you will have 3 written assignments. The first one's going to be a purpose of education. I'm going to briefly discuss this in the lecture component, but I want you to consider what the purpose of education is. If we go back to the concept of controlling the populace, I would suggest that our schooling it's pretty effective. It's creating a pretty passive populace that doesn't ask a lot of critical questions, that doesn't want to know where the money goes, that's not terribly concerned about whether things are ethical or moral, because we're not taught to ask the questions of whether this really makes sense. Does it pass the smell test? Our students instead are taught to be passive recipients of education. And I think that's by intention, and I think it's by design. I think because it's by design, we don't really feel a need to push back, when maybe we should be asking questions about why there's billionaires. Maybe we should be asking questions about why there's billionaires and why there's people starving in the same neighborhoods. I don't know, just a thought. Anyway, that's moving off design. So what is the purpose of education currently, based on how it's structured? And the other thing I want you to ask yourself is, what should it be? What should education be for our students? What should we be preparing people to do? What should we prepare people within our schooling? The second assignment is an annotated bibliography. You're going to collect peer-reviewed journals. You're going to look through those and develop an APA formatted peer-reviewed journal. Think of these as your notes for your final research paper that will help you to write that literature review. This annotated bib must be through, when you start to put your paper together, you're going to do it through the lens of social foundations, not just a research literature review. Looking at it from a historical perspective, or sociological, or philosophical, or political perspective. What does that perspective tell you about that particular topic? What are the factors that impact that issue based on that social foundations method? So these notes will help you to prepare that final paper, which is the literature review. Roughly 15 pages. I don't count pages, so don't worry if it's 13 or 20. I'm not going to worry too much about that. What I am going to be concerned about is the quality. I'm looking specifically for social foundations lens. I want you to make sure that that's the lens that you're using. I want you to make sure that when you're putting this together, it's APA formatted, it's well written. Do not use AI. Please don't use AI, because you can't redo it, and you'll fail. There's just no way to get around it, because that last paper is worth a chunk, and there's not an opportunity to redo the work. So don't do that. Anything else for that? Those are the assignments that you're going to have that are written. You'll have the 2 assignments I already discussed that are in class. You must be in class to receive points for that. Please be in class on the 11th and the 25th and the 10th so that you can get points for those particular class periods and that discussion. The other thing you'll have points for is you're going to meet with small groups to discuss readings over the course of the semester. That small group that you'll have that discussion with will be receive an assessment as well. What I'm going to have you do is one of 2 things. You can have one member of your group turn in minutes, just write out the minutes of what you discussed, make sure you include everybody that's there. Or the second thing that you could do is you could just record the video itself, and from that recording, I'll go ahead and take a look at it and just submit it into Blackboard. You could do it through Zoom, make a copy of it, send it to me, whatever you want to do with that. So that's the foundation and the formation of this course. I will be around to answer questions. If it's an urgent question, please put that in the subject line for now. I'm trying to answer as little email as possible over the next few weeks, several weeks actually. And I look forward to working with you all the rest of the semester, and I hope that you have a good summer. You might not have noticed, I'm not in the United States. What if you can figure out where I'm at? And if you can't figure out where I'm at, I wonder if you can figure out specifically where I'm at. All right, I'm gonna walk you back a little bit, give you some sceneries before I go. You can turn this off if you're done. Uh-oh, reading is cheating. This is me. Have a good day.